do we get to a point where people like Donald Trump and AOC and whatever is becoming popular nowadays, how do ideas that are so evil get to such a point that they are mainstream and basically taking over? That's the topic of tonight's talk, and we have Keith Weiner, CEO and founder of Monetary Metals. Keith, welcome back to the Ayn Rand Center UK. Please join me in welcoming Keith Weiner.
Thanks for having me, Razi. How the hell did we get here? The world's a mess. We have such a vast welfare state that Communist Manifesto plank number 2, which is high and progressive income taxes, is not sufficient to pay for it. So we need Communist Manifesto plank number 5, which is a central bank, in order to finance it by what people call money printing. I call it borrowing, whole different topic. Everything is regulated. Every productive enterprise is answerable to one or more, usually more, regulators. Most professions licensed. The government outright owns, roads, trains, mail, radio spectrum, airports, harbors, electric grids, water, sewer, and schools, plank number 10 of the Communist Manifesto. So we got at least 3 planks absolutely confirmed. For where we're at today, this is a mess. So today normally I talk about monetary topics, and I approach monetary science as a science, and conclusions about a science should be, if one has done the work all the way, certain, because the world behaves the way it does, and there are definable principles. One can articulate those principles. That's not speculative. That's not making assumptions about how people are going to behave. Today, I have a slightly less formal talk on a social science, which is the social trends that have brought us here. Looking at the things that Ayn Rand was saying in the 1950s and 1960s, and extrapolating forward, I think a lot of what's happening today, she absolutely foretold. And then the other things that are happening today that I think she'd be rolling over in her grave saying, oh my God, even I didn't, foresee that, happening. And one of which is, objectivists coming on board a bandwagon of, one of the 2 socialist parties in the United States. How does all this happen? I think it's worth saying the average person thinks that the average person is not on board with this whole mess that we have today. Most people think that somehow so in the United States, 537 evil people in Washington, that's 535 congressmen and senators, plus 2, president and vice president, have somehow hijacked a liberty-loving, freedom-loving culture and somehow dragged it all the way towards either socialism or national socialism, depending on, take your pick, and that somehow the solution is guns or whatever, we're going to shoot our way out of this. So the average person thinks this is unpopular with the average person, and yet that's not really so. And I know that I'm unpopular online whenever I point this out. And I say in the right frame, framed in the right way, virtually everybody supports virtually every aspect of our system. And so think about framing the question, should any old Yahoo be allowed to practice medicine? Almost everybody will say no, of course not. So, okay, we've just established that professions, at least important ones, so maybe not hairdressers, but doctors, doctoring is important, cutting hair is not important. That being the distinction between the 2, important professions should have to get a license, which means obtain permission, prior consent from the government before, practicing medicine. Should bankers be allowed to sell any old security to any old widow and orphan? No, of course not. So then we need the full set of banking regulation, securities regulation, accredited investor, that we have to protect the little people from investments that might lose money. And so we should have a rule that only rich, smart people should be allowed to buy what I think are most lucrative investments, frankly, but whatever the case may be, and so on. So in the right framing, people absolutely not only support but demand, insist that we should have all of these things. Should corporations be allowed to run rampant and make as much money as they possibly can? Almost nobody would say yes, of course they should. Of course, everybody would say, well, there's got to be curves. I remember an old uncle that I had with his heavy New York accent. There's got to be coibs. Coibs, he said. There's got to be. Without being specific, it was just he wanted restrictions, slammed on businesses, on anybody doing anything productive. So in political theory, there's something called the Overton window. The Overton window is the spectrum of what is allowed in polite debate. I don't know if it was Noam Chomsky who said that the way to control a society is to allow very vigorous debate, but only within a narrow spectrum or narrow band. I think it was Chomsky who said that. I could be wrong on the author of that, so please don't kill me if that turns out to be some other guy who said that. And so that's what we have today. In every topic, we have a false alternative. Either you are for the government forcing everybody to get vaccinated according to the government's dictates, or you are for the government banning certain vaccines. That's a false alternative. In monetary policy, you're either for the central bank, hiking interest rates to protect the value of your purchasing power of your savings by unemploying your neighbor. So if the central bank causes your neighbor to be unemployed, he can't outcompete you at the grocery store and prices will remain soft. And then the other side of the false alternative is the central bank should print more, which allegedly causes more employment and then allegedly causes rising prices by the mechanism that your neighbor is out competing you at the grocery store because he does a good job enabled by all the money printing. So it's either unemploy your neighbor or devalue your bank account in order to employ your neighbor. Every topic we have today is a false alternative. In immigration, either the government should import, that is centrally planned, let's bring 1 million of these groups over here, or the government should prohibit and maybe even deport 1 million people. Everything is a false alternative today because that's what is allowed to exist within the Overton window. There's a short story that just fascinated me when I first read it, called The Road to Abilene, which is set in Texas. Abilene was a town, I guess, 3 or 4 hour drive away. And this family is kind of all discussing, do you want to drive to Abilene? And they had one, I think this is in the 1930s or 1940s. Hang on a second. We got a disruption here. In the 1930s or 1940s, cars didn't have air conditioning. The summer in Texas gets very hot. I'm sure the temperature would have been 110 degrees in the shade, or whatever that works out to in centigrade, 42 or 43 degrees or something, plus humidity, and the cars in those days were black. It would have been miserable. And so everyone's like, well, if you want to go, I want to go. And everyone sort of agreed that, yes, we should drive to Abilene, even though actually nobody wanted to go. But everybody sort of wanted to go along with what everyone else wanted, or what they thought everyone else wanted. And so you end up going to Abilene and everyone's sitting in cramped, 6 people in this car, or whatever it was, swelteringly, blisteringly hot, just being miserable about it. And nobody actually wanted to be there. And that's kind of our, political system today. I thought I'd ask the audience a question, and for those of you that are watching this, ask yourself this question. Who has worked with regulation and compliance? Anybody familiar with this? And what's involved in this? So I coined a term that I call the regulatorium. And that's this artificial and unnecessary man-made environment in which nothing really makes sense. There's no common sense to it. And in fact, you go from one country to another, and in one country, the regulation forces certain things a certain way, and in another country, the regulation forces the same things to be the opposite way. In the United States, bathrooms like other rooms in the house, must have a certain number of outlets. There must be no more than a certain distance apart and so on, but they have to be so-called GFCI outlets, ground fault circuit interrupt. In the United Kingdom, I found out that it is illegal to have power outlets in bathrooms. So if you want to plug in a hairdryer, you need to have a mirror somewhere else because not allowed in the bathroom, which is where you have the mirror and the vanity and everything else. So both of these sets of regulations are nominally purported to make things safer, and yet they actually mandate opposite outcomes. So clearly one of them can't be, both of them can't be right. At least one of them has to be wrong, right? But there's no asking, does regulation make sense? Regulation isn't about making sense. Regulation is about coibs. It's about imposing coibs. If you're going to build a house, then damn it, we're not going to let you build it the way you'd want to build it. We're going to force you to put GFC outlets every 5 feet along the counters in the bathroom, or we're going to force you not to have power outlets, even if your customer wants them. But it's about forcing every little decision and micromanaging it to the nth degree. Regulation adds enormous amounts of friction that slow business down, especially slow innovation, and tends to protect large crony incumbents and tends to prevent startups from even getting formed in the first place because the cost of all the legal advice would be beyond what most startups can actually afford. The problem with the regulatorium and regulation, number one, it makes no sense. Number two, it doesn't actually create safety, doesn't actually protect the little guy, it protects the incumbents, and so on. But everybody has a general belief that there's got to be coibs, number one. And number two, the people that actually have to live in this regulatorium fall into one of two categories. Either they make their living as compliance managers and compliance officers, and they see a good thing going. It's job security. Do they get at some level that this actually makes no sense and this is hurting their employer? Maybe. But I think this is Upton Sinclair who said it's almost impossible, or it is impossible, to teach something to somebody that his salary depends on him not knowing. So you're not going to go have a lot of luck with compliance officers, compliance lawyers, and so on to convince them that regulation is harmful, let alone get them to speak out against it. The other types, there are plenty of businesses that are suffering under this, but there are real consequences if you speak out against your regulator, if you're regulated by a particular agency, and speak out against the regulation. The regulators are going to nail you. So you'd better be really careful. So the people that are actually experts and understand what all this regulation is doing, either kind of like it because they're getting paid a salary and they don't care that it's making their employer less profitable, or they are a little bit afraid, and they should be, because the regulator has essentially arbitrary and capricious powers, virtually unlimited powers, and the regulator can get back at you in ways that would never be traceable. The regulator isn't going to say, hey, John Smith, you said this on this date and we're going to get revenge against you. Of course not. They're going to say, you have a money laundering compliance problem here. And they're going to drill and drill and drill into something and make a mountain out of a molehill. Now, where does anti-money laundering come from? Somewhere, I assume back in the 1960s, some crook got caught doing something bad, and the angry mob said, why did his banker let him do that? Why did his bank let him get away with that? And the hue and cry was taken. People are angry at the bankers. That was, I think, long before the term bankster, which the first time I ever heard that term was after 2008 in the crisis. Why did the bankers let him do that? As if it was the decision of the banker to be a criminal, rather than that the criminal happened to be a client of this bank. So the United States passed the Bank Secrecy Act of, don't quote me, I want to say 1973. It's this old stuff. And since then, the rest of the world has passed their equivalents of this. And every year or two or three, the regulations are ratcheted up and compliance enforcement ratchets up. And it gets crazier and crazier and crazier and crazier and crazier to the point where any company could be accused of having made some error or omission in the case of money laundering compliance. And if you're accused of that, you can't say, well, look, really, it's just because 6 months ago I was critical of the regulator. Not going to fly. The regulatory hearings, they're not going to hear that, even if it went to a jury trial, which it never does. That they're not going to hear that. Nobody's going to agree with that. Nobody's going to understand that. Nobody's going to believe that. And meanwhile, you're up against either ruinous fines or sanctions that prohibit you from doing parts of your business, being shut down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So where am I going with all this? And this is kind of a loosely organized talk. We know, and Ayn Rand said, quote, "Evil is impotent and has no power but that which we let it extort from us," unquote. We know that the evil is impotent, and yet it seems like evil is winning. And as you look today, the trend has been over at least the last 150 years, that bit by bit, regulation and tax and welfare and licensure and all these things, civil asset forfeiture, on and on and on and on, with all of these attacks on the United States freedom of speech, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment. The attacks are relentless and have been for, this is a long time. This is not like, oh, this was Biden created this, or Obama created this, or Clinton created this, or dare I say, Bush, Trump, Reagan, Nixon, Ford, et cetera. This is very, very old. Why does evil seem to be winning if evil is impotent? And the first conceptual error that I want to call attention to with this line of thought, why does the evil seem to be potent? And Ayn Rand said it's impotent. Is objectivism wrong? Was Ayn Rand just simply mistaken in this? And my answer is no, this is actually equivocation. When she says evil is impotent, she means impotent over reality. You can evade reality, but you can't evade the consequences of having evaded reality. Evil is winning politically. That means that more and more people are inclined to give more and more evil people more and more power. So in that sense, it's winning. It doesn't mean that it's effective. It doesn't mean that as the economy gets under more controls, more subsidies, more taxes, more regulations, more licensure, that the economy becomes more productive and people become wealthier and happier with longer, more prosperous lives. That certainly doesn't mean that. Evil is not winning in that sense. Evil is winning in the sense that it's taking over. And so the good is giving its sanction for some odd reason or another. The good is giving its sanction to the evil. What is going on here? So I have another quote from Ayn Rand. When opposite basic principles are clearly and openly defined, it works to the advantage of the rational side. When they are not clearly defined, but are hidden or evaded, it works to the advantage of the irrational side, unquote. So let's unpack that. Where is this all going? Ayn Rand observed in the 1960s that America had a great sense of life, and that America's sense of life is what was standing as the bulwark against, had acted as a bulwark against the sweep of socialism and National Socialism, which was the trend of the 20th century, certainly the first half, but it entered a more quiescent phase after the end of World War II, but it certainly didn't end. That sense of life made Americans stop and hesitate about dallying with us and supporting this. But sense of life is precisely when the people who have the opposite principle, they have the principle of liberty, they have the principle of self-sufficiency, of independence, of rationality to some degree, or at least productiveness and pride in all the rugged individualism that America had. And I do unfortunately have to say past tense for the most part at this point. It was implicitly held, not explicitly and clearly and openly defined. And so against the relentless assault of the left, it could only but retreat. It didn't define its terms. The left was very clear as to what it wanted. Saul Alinsky, I'll be talking more about him in a bit. He asked his students, because all of his stuff is all about how to get power and how to, disrupt and how to protest and how to do all of these things and write letters to the editor to get power. And he said, no, what's the goal of power? And his students are like, well, to help the poor, to help the working people. No, he thundered at them. The purpose of power is to have power. The rest is all bull, beep, right? It's all just a pretext. The purpose of power, you want power for the sake of having power. That's it. And every communist is clear on this point. The socialists, the leadership certainly are, and the useful idiots, in some cases yes, in cases no. So against this onslaught, sense of life is not able to it can slow it maybe, but it can't win. And what the left does, and now the right, every word that matters, they apply a relentless pressure. Every day there's articles, every day there's talking points, every day they're questioning. We're just questioning the science, they say. We're just asking questions. The left said that in the 1960s. And one of the key words when someone says just, I'm just doing X, Y, Z, that's a subterfuge for, yeah, I know exactly what the hell I'm doing, and I want to get away with it, and I want a little bit of sleight of hand. I don't really think that what I'm doing is small. I want you to think it's small. Every word, take the word justice. There's been a relentless pressure on the word justice for decades to imply social justice, environmental justice, racial justice, justice for this or that cause, or this or that individual who was allegedly wronged, and so on. Freedom. What the hell does freedom mean? If you read about groups like the Hells Angels, not to pick on them in particular, but everybody in that biker gang, any of the biker gangs, will say that they're all about freedom, man. And then you read when people have left the gangs and they give interviews and they talk about it, that is one of the most controlling, restrictive, social groups you could possibly imagine. I mean, you have to swear to your brothers that you'll put your brotherhood with the bikers ahead of any female romantic interest you might have. You are obligated to show up for certain things and support your brothers in certain ways, and yes, even commit criminal acts, if called upon to do so. And they don't necessarily ask everybody to commit murder, but they ask everybody to be participants in bullying and all kinds of stuff, when it suits the gang. And they call that freedom. What the hell does freedom mean anymore? Well, after half a century of relentless assault on a word like that, nobody can define it. What does vaccine mean? I've seen people, including in our own objectivist community, insisting, apparently earnestly, that the COVID vaccine is not really, it's not really a vaccine because, and then they insert something that no, forget first year med students, no student of biology, even at the undergraduate level would accept. It would just laugh at. It's not a vaccine, you see. Due process. Well, anybody here illegally doesn't deserve due process. We don't need to give them due process. So somehow the word due process is under such stress. It's been so distorted and mutated. Apparently now it's a gift of the government. Something we gift maybe certain groups, but not others in this particular twisted, mutated, perverted view. Science. What's the false alternative today? Either you are for, without using the word for a moment, the activity of government officials claiming the mantle of this thing, which I won't name the word, in order to browbeat you or even literally pass laws to force you to do this and not do that. And some of them would have taken it as far as to have you held down by, U.S. Marshals while they inject you with something you didn't want to be injected with. They're certainly in this country talking about net zero. They're going to force you to be cold in the winter, hot in the summer, and not driving anywhere. So you can take mass transit to your job and you can come home at the end of the day and that's it. And you will have nothing and be happy. That's science. And the other side, what are they doing? They're saying, we're just questioning the science. People who've never taken a science class in their life, whose daily activity involves repetitious labor of some sort, are questioning the science. And then they'll quote Richard Feynman or somebody like that with some out of context quote about, answers have to be questioned or whatever, not understanding that it takes a certain level of basic education, if not expertise, in order to question anything. So the concept of questioning basically means I don't like what the mainstream is saying, and I have a whim that I'd like to substitute, and I'll call that questioning. So every word comes under this relentless pressure. And so, of course, the sense of life retreats ahead of this because it hasn't defined its terms. There's another quote from Ayn Rand that I want to bring out now. In any conflict between two men or two groups who hold the same basic principles, it is the more consistent one who wins. I think that is one of the most important principles. I mean, there's so many. I know I'm going to get hate mail. This one is more important, and that one's more important. Yes, they're all right. There's so many important principles, but this one is so important, and I think underappreciated. If two groups are trying to collaborate, the one that's evil is smirking and gloating and happy for that collaboration. And I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. In the conflict, two groups agree on basic principles, and one is much more consistently evil, and the other one is inconsistently evil or more mixed premises. Look what happened, in the right wing in politics in America today. You have various kinds of liberty-leaning Republicans throwing in with somebody who says it's going to be a bloodbath of tens of millions of deportations. We're seeing what that means now. It means without due process, which they believe to be a gift, we can nab anybody off the street and render them to a torture prison in El Salvador. Were everybody on the right wing on board with this? Well, not exactly or not explicitly, but they're sort of on board and they want to collaborate because America has to be cleaned up, and cleaning up America in part means cleaning up the illegals. Although maybe they felt that we should be more sure of who's actually here legally before we start deporting them. But you see this collaboration all over the place. I'm sorry, you see this conflict where one side, I'm sorry, I keep getting ahead of myself. And conflict between two groups that hold the same principles. The example for that is the Republicans versus the Democrats over the last 80 years. The Democrats say we have to build Social Security. The Republicans say, well, no. And then once Social Security is enacted, well, we have to preserve it. And the Democrats are saying grow it, and the Republicans are sort of posing at fighting against it. And the welfare state just advances, relentlessly. You can't oppose somebody who has the same basic idea. This happens with regulation. This happens with the welfare state. This happens with Social Security. This happens with everything. End result of this is that because everybody does share the same basic principles, we're headed towards some sort of socialist. Socialism is ultimately totalitarian. That's the end game. And everything short of totalitarianism is just a temporary stage where the socialist, the leaders of it who know what they're doing, are taking inch by inch. They know they can't get it all in one go. Each temporary staging ground is just the opportunity to launch the next assault. And as long as all sides accept, what do they accept? It's altruism. If everybody accepts altruism, that's why they want curbs on rich corporations. That's why they want licensure. They feel that in any interaction between two people is necessarily win-lose. The side that's profiting is winning and the customer is losing. The bank is winning, the borrower or the depositor is losing. The landlord is winning, the tenant is losing. The doctor is winning, or the hospital is winning, the patient is losing. And so on, down the line. As long as everybody accepts that to some degree, all you have is fighting a long retreat. And that's been kind of how our society has worked. Now I get to any collaboration between two groups who hold different principles. It's the more evil, irrational ones who win. That's the quote from Ayn Rand. So how do we have longtime objectivists, even longtime teachers of objectivism, who are throwing on board something that clearly falls into this into this idea of collaboration with somebody who holds different basic principles? these are altruists, these are socialists of the nationalist variety. People are confused. I want to say one thing about National Socialism, and I'm not calling it Nazism because I don't want Godwin's law, everyone saying, oh, he said Hitler, blah, 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 and, this politician or that politician isn't literally, yeah, that's right, it's not. The National Socialists in Germany in the 1930s, there was a early party leader named Gregor Strasser who said, from the left, we must take socialism without internationalism. From the right, we must take nationalism without capitalism. So that's what they combined, is nationalism and socialism. Everybody somehow, because the left and because of everything I've been talking about, believes that fascism is a right-wing idea, but actually it combines a right-wing idea and a left-wing idea. It's actually of both, or it's really left because of socialism. So why are, knowing these principles, including people who've taught these principles formally, knowing these principles, why are they on board collaboration with somebody with opposite basic ideas? Knowing that Ayn Rand said in that collaboration, the guy with the opposite idea, whose evil idea, is going to win. Why are they on board this? Let's give everybody a moment to pause, and for the live audience, see if anybody cares to volunteer an answer to that. I mean, this is the existential question of our era, I think. I mean, from a perspective of studying social movements, social trends, why even? I mean, let alone, so many folks in the Republican Party, so many even libertarians coming on board, authoritarianism. Why is this the case? Let alone that even objectivists are doing it. And if we in our movement are doing it, you can see how it's going to be incredibly tempting to everyone else who's not familiar with Ayn Rand, who doesn't have that admonition that if you collaborate with somebody with opposite basic ideas, evil side is going to win. Even we're doing it, and we know that. Why? Because they think evil is powerful. And either, therefore, you have to do it because you have to win. It's about win. Or they know that the powerful is impotent, the evil is impotent, powerful is potent, and therefore, because they think that evil is potent, is powerful, they then deduce, therefore it's not evil, it's actually the good. And we saw this over and over and over again with people saying, well, you have to vote for the lesser evil. And, a year later, they're insisting that it's the greater good, and they will ostracize you and hate you if you say that it's not the greater good. They believe it is fundamentally powerful, it is potent. Politically, it is. I'm going to talk about Saul Alinsky and his rules for radicals, at least a few of them. But politically, it's potent. It's not potent in reality. It's not going to make America great again. It's not going to make America great at all. It's going to make America weak and less great than it had been. But they believe that it is potent. And that is something that is really remarkable, should be really remarkable. That somehow the culture, because of the way things are framed and because of political alliances, today we've reached a point that if somebody says they believe in something and you think they're holding as a principle, if the opposite party advocates that as a policy, they will then turn around and say, well, of course that's evil. I've never believed we should do X. Whereas for the last 20 years, they believed we should do X. Now I'm against X because the other guys are for it. That's part of, with the right framing, people will go along the road to Abilene with all kinds of things. So this guy named Saul Alinsky was a professor in New York City. I want to say it must have been City College, because that's where the hard left was, but I don't exactly know what his university affiliation was. They used to call City College the Little Red Schoolhouse. That was red being the key thing. That pejorative came about in the 1930s. But it could have been Columbia. It could have been City University of New York. I don't know exactly which university. And he was a communist, and he was all about teaching these young radicals, posturing as hippies who just wanted to have fun and just wanted freedom, man. about protesting and about how to get power, to advance the cause of communism. And so he taught in his classroom this stuff. As I said earlier, he said to his class one time, "What is the purpose of power?" And people said, one student said, "Well, it's to help the poor." Another one said, "Help the working people." "No," he thundered. "Power, the sake of power is power. This is about getting power, period. That's what you're after." This is what he was trying to sculpt this army of people. It's a lust for power. It's a lust for the unearned, lust for the ability to command others to do what they would not do. So he wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. And this is regarded, just like Machiavelli, regarded as intrinsically evil, yada, yada, yada. I think as part of a good, well-rounded education, people should read stuff like this. I think you should read the Communist Manifesto. I think you should read The Prince by Machiavelli. I think you should read Rules for Radicals. And some of the stuff is pretty turgid prose. Marx was not a great writer. Alinsky is much simpler and clearer. I found The Prince by Machiavelli certainly to be easy enough to read. The ideas are clear enough to what he's saying. And so I'm going to skip to the point. He had 12 or 13, I think 13 rules for radicals. And this is all about how you plan. Like if you're the organizer of these protests and letter campaigns and sit-ins and all the stuff that they were doing, I think 1960s, what should you do? Number 4, and I think this is the most interesting in the context of everything I've been talking about, make the enemy live up to his own book of rules. Something I've observed today, and I think this is just a sign of moral relativism. What is the most deadly thing that both sides, left and right, can think to accuse the other side of? Anybody have any idea on that? You see it over and over and over and over and over, and all these memes alleging that AOC did this, Bernie did this, Elizabeth Warren did this, Trump did this, Keir Starmer did this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Hypocrisy. The worst possible sin is to act in some way against the words that you yourself have said. So there's no objective standard. There's only your own words, your own prior recent words. And if you did something against your own previous words, that is irredeemably evil, according to the hit and run, score a point, bumper sticker logic that passes for political debate nowadays. So Alinsky is saying your enemy claims to be all altruistic and good and this and that and the other thing. Force him into a situation he can be exposed as a filthy hypocrite. Now, Alinsky knows full well that their side is also a bunch of filthy hypocrites. But this is all about going on the offensive. It's about accusing the other side of things, even if you yourself are just guilty of sin. Doesn't matter. I mean, look at how Trump will say, so-and-so is a liar, so-and-so is this, so-and-so did that. You could say, well, wait, you're doing the same thing, right? Doesn't matter. The one who is standing behind that finger of accusation, the finger of blame, has the power. The person who's on the other side is now, what is he going to do? Rule number 13, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Joe Biden is a liar, lying Joe. Now, what is Joe Biden supposed to do? Well, I'm not a liar. You see, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Richard Nixon infamously declared, I'm not a crook. It was basically all over for Richard Nixon after that. When somebody's denying something, it gives it a credibility, especially if the other side is relentlessly pressing the attack. And everybody on both sides of this, altruism, everybody accepts altruism as the moral code. Altruism is not practicable. That's the problem with it. So everybody who professes serious altruism is a hypocrite. They all have to draw the line of how far they practice it and how they actually want to remain living and succeed in life to any degree. Altruism, so it's not an effective code for living. It doesn't give you any guidance to how to live. You just have to break your moral code and feel guilty for living. But it's a heck of a formula for judging other people. And the other side of it, when altruism is used to judge other people, is envy. And I like to talk about, there's an old Soviet joke, and I posted this online many, many times. Farmer is digging in his field. He finds an old lamp. pulls it out. The genie comes out, and the genie says, I will grant you one wish, but whatever I do for you, I will double for your neighbor. The guy thinks about it for a minute, and the farmer says to the genie, blind me in one eye. Envy. Envy. Not the desire to succeed, not the desire to help the poor, the desire to take that guy down who's richer than you, or in any way more successful than you, whatever it is. His farm is growing one more vegetable per year than you are. Take him down. Now that guy's blind. Let's now see how he can farm. Blinded. And of course, socialism, especially when it was practiced consistently, as in Stalin's Soviet Union, Mao's China, Pol Pot's Cambodia, Ho Chi Minh's, Vietnam, Kim's North Korea, the most consistent of all. The more consistently it's practiced, the more consistently it finds everybody with sight and blinds them. And instead of uplifting everyone else, all it does is it tears the whole society down. If all your farmers are blind, then you're not going to grow a lot of food and everybody starves. And that's basically, North Korea today. Ridicule, this is number 5. Ridicule is man's most potent weapon. There is no defense. It is almost impossible to counterattack ridicule. Also, it infuriates the opposition who then react to your advantage. Now, what do we know about ridicule and laughing at virtue, laughing at values? Wasn't there a little scene in The Fountainhead where this is happening? And Ellsworth Toohey, who's the evil villain, is talking about, you don't have to, ban books or ban virtue or ban all these things, just laugh at it. And the laughter will destroy it and wipe it out. Laughter is negation. If you're laughing at virtue, you're negating virtue. So ridicule somebody, make everybody laugh at him, and he has now become persona non grata. He's done for. And Trump, of course, uses this to his success, as certainly the left has done many, many times. These are potent weapons only to the extent that the allegedly opposite side is actually the same as your side. But both sides accept the same basic principles. Both sides want socialism, maybe to slightly differing degrees, or maybe they want the government to have more control over this part of the economy, and this rival gang wants the government to have more control over this part of the economy. But they're both basically similar. And Alinsky is saying, given that, now he takes that as metaphysically given. Objectivism teaches that you should never confuse the man-made with the metaphysical. This is man-made. The fact that our entire society has gone all in on this altruist and envy creed. But given that everybody has, Alinsky is treating this as a God-given fact of nature, which it is not. But given that, then these weapons, or to use a modern term, to weaponize ridicule, to weaponize personalizing things, weaponize hypocrisy, is very powerful. Politically, it's very effective. Once you get the mob laughing like a bunch of hyenas at somebody, you can foreclose on any further debate. It's kind of argumentum ad hominem as well. Whatever that person was saying is wiped out, along with that person's character and public, ability to show his face in public ever again. And now you can just smoothly proceed as if your next agenda, whatever wealth tax, was the consensus all along. And for all these variety of reasons, the Overton window, the road to Abilene, the basic acceptance of altruism, which means those who oppose these things say, well, but it's expensive and it's inefficient and whatever, those objections are swept out to sea, especially when they see that the leading spokesman against a wealth tax has just been ridiculed and laughed out of town and so on. So this is a powerful, tool and technique to drive a social trend. I thought I'd end, that's a pretty bleak idea. I've basically said, look, in the realm of politics, the evil is quite potent for all these reasons, and even half of the objectivist community is willing to be on board for a variety of reasons, and I've touched on some of them. I don't want to leave it there. I don't want to leave everybody with just no hope that there's any way out of this, that our society is irrevocably, going to hell in a handbasket. So I want to ask the question, what's the solution? How the hell do you get out of this? Because this is classic self-fulfilling, it's a positive feedback loop. And there's a ratchet and there's resonance. So in engineering, resonance is when a system responds in a way such that it's synergistic with whatever forces are perturbing it. Is everybody familiar with the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington State collapsed? I think it was 1947. What's amazing about this is somebody was actually there with, of course, there was no video in those days, let alone iPhones. Somebody was there with an 8mm film movie camera to actually watch the bridge collapse. And so this is on YouTube. Everybody should Google Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington State. So this bridge goes over this gorge or this ravine, gorge, I guess, in Washington State. And there's a river, whatever, 100 meters below. And the nature of this valley that a bridge spans across has this wind that comes down the ravine. But it's not a steady wind, which would have been okay. It's a gusting wind, and the gusting was periodic. And the period of the wind happened to match the resonant frequency of the structure. Every building, everything has a resonant frequency to it. And if you get this gust of wind and the bridge isn't designed with the right aerodynamics and other things so that different parts of the bridge should have different resonant frequencies, they didn't understand that principle at that time, or at least the people designing that bridge didn't understand that. And so every gust of wind caused the bridge to move. And what it did is it created a torsional wave. The bridge was twisting along its long axis. And with every gust, it twisted just a little bit more. And the amplitude of the twist, I'm exaggerating it, became more and more and more until the steel couldn't handle the strain anymore, and it started to tear and snap. And then the whole thing collapsed and fell into the water below. And there was one guy whose car was on it while it was bucking and twisting. But he got out of the car, and as far as I know, he actually ran off the bridge to safety. The car went down, and I don't think anybody actually got hurt. But the bridge was destroyed, and now whatever side of the river he was on, he would have had 8 hours to find his way to the next thing to get back home. So that is an example of resonance. And what we have today, there's a resonant system with positive feedback, and that's why the system just continues to go further and further off the rails. There's no self-correction mechanism. People say, well, if it gets bad enough, then people will demand a change. Well, it gets worse and worse and worse. We are much worse today than whatever people would have thought enough might have meant in the 1990s. And yet they keep demanding, well, yes, they want to change. They want more of the poison that's killing us because they don't recognize this as a poison for all the reasons we've been talking about. What the hell is the solution to this? And I think I've got the right answer, but at least I have an interesting one that I want to pose for everybody to consider. And that is, instead of having one, let's just say, overarching institute that teaches all things objectivism, and of course, people aren't going to tune in and follow that institute unless they agree across the board on all the different issues, which is almost impossible with each issue. Most of these issues are quite controversial. Each issue divides the audience in half and half again and half again. And the group of people, if you have 10 issues, the size of the group is 1,024th of where you started. And if there's 20 issues, it would be 1,000,000th, and so on. I would like to propose, and I think I've said this in another talk before, that people consider the idea of 1,000 for-profit enterprises, each enterprise targeting a specific area where the government is attacking liberty and therefore attacking prosperity and therefore attacking what people want to be able to do and are now prevented from doing, or the government makes it prohibitively expensive, or whatever the case may be. Each of these for-profit but for-purpose enterprises can solve one problem and build quite a large market and quite a large following because they're not insisting on loyalty to a million other unrelated issues to their one issue. Obviously, myself, Monetary Metals, we're trying to fix the monetary system, or if even if we don't necessarily go that far, give people a way to save in money and get a return paid in money, not subject to inflation and debasement and devaluation and all the things that governments are doing to their currencies today. There's other for-profit enterprises out there, ARCUK being one of them, solving the problem, I guess, I don't know how Razi would put this, correct me if I'm wrong, that the mainstream media, perhaps because of licensure and all kinds of other things, has become kind of an organ of the state. And there isn't really a great deal of spectrum, within the Overton window, but there's things that need to be said, and there's an audience who wants to hear them. And so by creating a channel, you've got an audience who just would otherwise be completely disenfranchised and disaffected. Whatever the case may be, look at Uber. Now, Uber didn't try to set out to provide greater liberty to anybody, but what they ended up doing is an end run around taxi regulation and provided a radically better experience besides. So if I want to take an Uber home, instead of having to go to the high street from here, I can just call an Uber and watch on a visual map of the streets here in London until the car is right out in front. And then I can just walk out, get into the car, and have to stand there in the rain and the cold and whatever. Effectively, they've given people some of their liberty back that was taken by, the taxi regulators. So this is what I would like to see. I'm deadly serious about this. Let me put it this way. Everybody sees problems in the world. Most people think the government's going to solve their problems, and they either want to lobby the government for something, or they want to find whichever party seems to, in a loose gestalt sort of sense, resonate with those problems, and they want to vote their way to have the government fix their problems for them. That's obviously not working. I think that's abundantly clear. Other people will, complain to their friends over a beer and then go back to work. The entrepreneur is the crazy guy who says, I see the problem and I see a way to make money solving the problem. So I'm not just exhorting people to altruistically start companies for the good of everyone else and at the sacrifice of yourself. That would just be a repetition of the same altruist dogma that you get everywhere else. I'm saying if you do this well, you can make a lot of money and you can have a great deal of satisfaction. And I think there's a massive opportunity because nobody else is thinking this way about entrepreneurship and liberty and combining them in that way. And if you can do that and come up with something good, first of all, please do reach out and let me know. Because there's nothing else, I want to cheer you on, and I can shine a little bit of public spotlight your way, given my own audience at this point. But I want to encourage everybody to think about that. If you want more liberty, think about being an entrepreneur to create it.
Okay, people in the room, if you have a question, unless you're in the front row, come up here so that the mic will pick it up. It will pick up everybody. Are you sure? All right, then if you are not coming up here, speak up. There was a question. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. There was a question here. El Rito asked, why are the wrong ideas allowed to proliferate?
Allowed by whom?
It doesn't allow it, but maybe people.
I mean, one of the ideas that is becoming more popular on the right is that some people have the wrong ideas, and the government should. Actually, the right is now in the US openly talking about rooting out evil, and they use the word rooting out, and purifying is another word they use. These are medieval, terms. They should picture. This should conjure up images of the Inquisition, in the 15th century. It's the nature of a free society that people can promote evil ideas. It's not the nature of a free society that evil ideas are fundamentally potent, even in the realm of politics. They're potent only because they're appealing to something people already deeply hold, which is altruism, as I said. So yes, evil ideas are going to be out there. The question is, why do they take hold and sweep the entire, culture globally? That's the thing that we should be confronting, not the fact that the evil idea was uttered in the first place. I don't think the right answer. So my understanding is, to this day, it is illegal in Germany to say anything pro-Nazi or pro-Hitler. I understand the historical reasons when, the Allies went in 1945 and denazified Germany, why that was arguably necessary at that time. And here we are many years later, 80 years later, that long ago should have been scrapped. And if somebody wants to say, something good about Hitler, well, say it, and then be prepared to be judged for the buffoon or worse that you are.
I don't see anybody raising their hand, but I have a question. So I love the idea of basically offering free market solutions to problems the government creates. In many fields, so you're doing that. Alex Epstein, I don't know if
yeah, absolutely. I would say yes, absolutely.
But there are fields in which you can't, because they won't. In the spirit of who allows it, there are things the government will not allow. There are, you can't, put late tracks and have trains competing with the government's trains in this country.
Right.
Yeah. So how do you navigate that, and also how do you? I'm thinking the trend is that there's going to be more of that. More things that you can't do. Certainly in this country, and it looks like in the U.S.
I mean, obviously, if something's illegal, and I guess there's some things that, when Uber started, what they were doing was illegal, and they just said, well, full steam ahead. And they figured they would scale before the regulators would really catch up to them. And for given something like taxi regulation, which is obviously highly fragmented, turned out not to be a bad strategy. And by the time city of Austin, Texas, everyone thinks of Texas as free markets. Texas is one of the few places where they tried to ban Uber and Lyft. And in Austin, it was illegal to have Uber and Lyft for, I think it was a month or something like that. I don't know how long it actually lasted. But by that point, they were so big. What?
I was there in Austin when they banned it for that month or whatever it was. But then it was overruled, wasn't it, by the state? Well, I was
going to say, it was so overwhelmingly unpopular because there were so many customers that wanted Uber that got angry with the politicians for doing that it became politically untenable. And so they reversed their decision, and Uber is perfectly legal in Austin today. Look, obviously, you can't offer a hospital and call it a free market in medicine and just build that hospital right here in London. There's a lot of rules and regulations around that, who you can hire and what services you can offer and how to get reimbursed. And I don't know if the UK is one of those countries where it's actually illegal to have any private medicine. I know there are some socialized medicine countries that have that. Others allow a parallel private system. You have to be, if you want to innovate in that area, you have to become really educated on what the regulations are. And you're going to have to work with major law firms to get an opinion letter to give you a freedom to operate, memo. You'll be really, really careful with this shit. But I do think that there's a ton of areas where this kind of innovation is possible, either because like taxi regulation, there's not all that serious about it, and they're fragmented and not organized, and the government doesn't move that fast. You can get to a critical mass of customers, it becomes politically untenable for them to, stop you. Or there's other areas where they haven't gotten around to regulating yet, or they haven't thought of it, or, whatever. And I think there's a ton of opportunity. Not everywhere, that is true. There is no answer to that. Ultimately, unless you can build a constituency to lobby for it, that's hard. I've given up on lobbying. I lobbied for gold at the state level for 5 years. Finally, at the end of that, and I lobbied in a bunch of states. Finally, at the end of 5 years, Arizona finally passed a very watered down version of what the original bill had been 5 years earlier. So I'm not a big fan of wasting my time doing that anymore.
So going back to one of the things you were talking about, which was that some objectivists are aligning themselves with, I'm guessing you're saying, the Republicans and Trump. That's like it's just, I don't know if that's the way.
Yeah, I don't really want to make it too political because this is way bigger than just, do you like Trump or hate Trump? This is, do you somehow throw in saying you have to vote for the lesser evil, and that becomes support the lesser evil, and that becomes it's actually not evil at all, it's the greater good. How does that happen? How did that happen? Because it has happened. And what are the causes for that, and how do we address that?
Yeah, you're making a distinction between someone who says, I think it's important to vote in this particular election. I think the alternative to, say, Trump is really, really bad. But I recognize that Trump is bad. And that's how, and then subsequently when Trump does stuff you should condemn, that they condemn it. Versus the person who, let's say, because for me, like you was, I wanted to move to the point where you're saying why are they supporting this evil person or evil policies, and I think you said something like because they think evil is not impotent, they think evil is powerful, something like that. So an alternative interpretation is that they have turned the other side into such a massive great evil. So they think the Democrats are about to destroy the country, that they're just suppressing and evading the facts, the negative facts about the other side, who they're pinning all their hopes on to save them from the left. So that's like.
But isn't that the same thing, that they think the evil is fundamentally potent, and they imbue all that potency into Biden or Harris? It's the same thing.
It's politically potent, as you said.
But they don't necessarily make that distinction. They just think they believe it's powerful, and right, they have a great deal of fear of what Harris would do. And one of the observations that I made at the time before the election was both Biden and Harris were quite ineffectual. Biden for 4 years accomplished almost none of his agenda. The United States, the whole world over, the idea of a minimum wage is uncontroversial. That is, virtually everybody accepts that there should be a minimum wage set by statute. And the only real debate is whether it should be $7.50 an hour, $15 an hour, $30 an hour, or whatever. Biden was not even successful in getting a national minimum wage hike where he wanted it to be, let alone anything else, because he was bumbling and incompetent and stupid, and also not particularly popular, even on his own side. He was not a rallying point for the left. He was just like, well, he's the schmuckola that we got, so I guess we better show up on election day and support him. Harris was even less popular than Biden. I don't think if the Democrats had time to devise a strategy, they ever would have put her on the ballot. But when it finally came out that Biden was too senile to continue, in fact, didn't he get out of some allegation? It was some criminal thing that he did, something he did that was really wrong, and the defense was basically he's got dementia and therefore doesn't have mentis compass. So very, very late in the process, they run the VP. And I argued, wouldn't it be better to have ineffectual, incompetent, and broadly disliked evil politician that everybody could oppose, and her friends would be completely demoralized, the left would be completely demoralized, not showing up in support, and everybody could rally behind, let's oppose this, rather than having somebody whose policies are actually pretty damn similar, but who's incredibly popular and doing it in the name of capitalism and freedom and American greatness. And but my response to your question is there are very few of the people who said, okay, this other side is greater evil, let's vote for the lesser evil and hold it accountable. There's astonishingly few people in that category. And the vast majority of them may have begun, well, yes, it's the lesser evil, but we have to vote for it because you have to vote for somebody. Who's your choice? And all these sort of evasive, pivoting type arguments. And then after the election, they're on board and you have to support President Trump and you have to support this and you have to support that. And they're going all the way down, down the line, supporting everything. And so if they said that they recognized it was a lesser evil, they were disingenuous at the time that they said that, and it's not what they really meant. And that's where we are today, is they're fully on board. With one or two notable exceptions. And without getting into names, I don't really want to personalize this, and it's not really about Trump. I mean, it's no secret I'm not a fan of Trump. I'm not a fan of Biden either. And a lot of times the Trumpists will disingenuously say, well, you support Biden and you support the communists. No, I don't. I'm a radical for laissez-faire capitalism, and I'm a radical for laissez-faire capitalism in the one area that even the otherwise free marketers are not for free market in, which is money and credit. So, this is a broader issue, which is we have a social trend that's headed in this direction, and if it's not Trump, it will be somebody else. And Trump is now approaching 80. In 4 years, it will be somebody else. Who's it going to be? What are they going to stand for? And as this dynamic continues, it's only going to get worse. This trend continues towards nationalism and socialism.
All right. So thanks everyone. Thanks everyone for coming. Wait, before you click out, the next thing on this channel is. Oh, did you already?
No, but they can see it.
They don't need to see me. They can hear me. Tomorrow, the Daily Objective 5th birthday. Make sure you tune in for that. Thanks, Keith. Thanks everybody for joining and for coming here, and we'll see you tomorrow.